The box was not heavy. That was the thing that stayed with Marcus Cole all the way to the parking lot. 6 years of his life fit into a cardboard box that a 9-year-old could carry without breathing hard. A coffee mug, a charging cable, a framed photo of his daughter, a small cactus he had named Gerald because Priya thought cactus plants needed names, and a notebook with a cracked spine. That was it. 6 years, one box. Not heavy at all. He sat in his car and did not start it. The clock on the dashboard said 9:47 in the morning. On a Tuesday, he was supposed to be in a meeting at 10. He had prepared for that meeting. He had printed documents for that meeting. Those documents were still sitting on his desk inside the building, next to the coffee he had poured and never touched. He had walked in to find his supervisor waiting at the door with the kind of face people make when they have been rehearsing what to say since the night before. Restructuring. That was the word they used. Marcus had nodded. He had said nothing offensive. He had accepted the box. He had walked out. He had even held the door open for a woman coming in from outside, because that is what his mother raised him to do. And some habits do not stop just because the floor has dropped out from under you. Now he sat, engine off, hands in his lap. His phone buzzed. 2 missed calls from Priya's school. He stared at them. Priya was 7 years old and in 2nd grade, and she had been complaining about her shoes rubbing her left heel for 2 weeks. Picture day was Friday. He had been planning to buy her a new pair this weekend with his paycheck, the one that was no longer coming. He called the school back first. It was nothing serious. A small question about a permission slip. He said he would send it in tomorrow. He hung up and sat again. He did the math in his head without wanting to. It was the kind of math that does itself, uninvited, at the worst possible moment. Rent was due in 11 days. The electricity auto-pay was going to pull in 4 days. He had roughly $300 in his account, and a little over $20 in cash in his wallet. His car needed an oil change it had needed for 6 weeks. He had groceries for maybe 4 more days if he was careful, and did not count Priya's cereal habit, which he could not bring himself to cut because she ate it with such complete happiness every morning that it felt like removing something sacred from the world. He drove to the grocery store. He did not plan to. He just found himself pulling into the lot on Greenfield Avenue, the one with the broken cart return near the entrance that had been broken for as long as he could remember. He parked and sat for another minute, and then he got out, because sitting in cars was not going to feed his daughter. He had $20 in cash, and enough in the account for the auto pays, and nothing more. He picked up a small bag of rice, a carton of eggs, a can of beans, a loaf of bread, and he stood in the cereal aisle for a long time. The box with the bird on it cost $4.29. He looked at it. Priya had started calling the cartoon bird on the box Freddy, and she talked about Freddy with the kind of affection most children reserve for actual pets. She would point at Freddy during breakfast and say things like, "I think Freddy had a good day today." It was one of those small, strange rituals of childhood that a parent collects quietly in their chest like stones, not because they are dramatic, but because they are real. He put the box in the cart. Then he stood there looking at the total he was building in his head, and he took it back out and set it on the shelf and walked to the register. The woman ahead of him was somewhere in her late 60s, small, white-haired, moving with the careful patience of someone whose knees had opinions. She had a modest pile of groceries on the belt: crackers, soup cans, a small bunch of bananas, a carton of milk. She was counting bills from her purse when the total came up on the screen. She counted again. She looked at the cashier, a young man with tired eyes, and she said she was sorry. She started to say she would have to put something back. Marcus watched her hands on the purse. The way she counted, the slight color that came into her face. He had seen that color before. He had felt that color before. It was the color of needing to apologize for not being able to make the numbers work in front of strangers. He said, "I have it." He handed the cashier his 20. He did not make a performance of it. He did not say anything inspiring or look at the woman with an expression that required her to feel emotional. He just handed the bill over and looked at the candy display near the register while the transaction finished. He got back $8.42. The woman touched his arm and said thank you, in a voice that came from somewhere deep and honest. He told her it was no problem and he meant it, even though the math in his head was now doing things that were frankly alarming. He drove home with rice, eggs, beans, bread, and $8.42. He carried the box inside. Gerald the cactus went on the kitchen windowsill. The photo of Priya went back on his desk. The notebook went next to his laptop. He made a cup of coffee and opened the laptop and started a new page in a document he had been hoping he would never need to use. Job search log. Date, Tuesday. He typed the first application before he finished his coffee. He told himself he would get through this. He had gotten through things before. Not this exact thing, but things. He knew how to hold the floor steady when it wanted to tilt. He had been practicing that skill for a long time, since well before Priya, since before the job he just lost, since the particular Tuesday when he was 14 and came home from school, and his father's car was gone and stayed gone. He was not going to think about that right now. He had applications to write. It was 10:43 in the morning. He had been unemployed for exactly 56 minutes. He typed. Priya came home at 3:15 with a drawing she had made in class. It was a man standing in front of a tall building with many windows, wearing a tie, smiling a smile that used the whole bottom half of his face. Above it, in purple crayon, in the large careful letters of a child who has recently learned to be proud of her handwriting, it said, Dad's new job. Marcus looked at it for a moment. He taped it to the wall above his desk. He told her it was the best piece of art he had ever seen, which was not a lie. She asked what was for dinner, and he said eggs and rice, and she said that sounded good, with the easy acceptance of a child who has not yet learned to be suspicious of simplified meals. He cooked while she did her homework at the kitchen table, narrating her math problems out loud, in a way that suggested she was not entirely sure he was listening but did not mind. He listened to every word. He ate after she finished. She did not notice. She was 7, and the world was still mostly made of drawings, and Freddie the cereal bird, and the particular pleasure of narrating math problems to a parent who loves you. He was glad about that. He intended to keep the world that way for her as long as he could manage it. He washed the dishes. He put her to bed. He read 2 chapters of the book she was currently obsessed with, the one about the girl who discovers a hidden door in her grandmother's house, and he did the voices the way she liked, and he turned off the light and came back to his desk. He had submitted 3 applications by midnight. He lay down on his side of the bed, which was the only side of the bed because there was no other person to share it with, and he stared at the ceiling for a while in the dark. The ceiling did not offer any useful information. He closed his eyes. He thought about the woman at the grocery store, her hands on the purse, the color in her face. He thought about how quickly she had thanked him, and how genuine it was, without any of the complicated awkwardness that sometimes comes with accepting help. She had just said thank you, and meant it entirely, and walked away with her groceries. He wondered if she had anyone at home waiting for her. He wondered if he would have done it differently, if he had known, standing in that line, what the next few weeks were going to look like. He did not think he would have. He fell asleep to the sound of the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, and Priya breathing quietly in her room down the hall, and those 2 sounds together were enough to carry him under. Tomorrow he would apply to more jobs. Tonight, $8.42 was what he had, and he had chosen that number on purpose. And somewhere in him, beneath the anxiety and the math and the ceiling staring, there was something very small and very steady that did not feel ashamed of that. He held on to it. It was enough to sleep on. The notebook filled faster than Marcus expected. He had started it as a practical thing, not a sentimental one. A single column on each page. Company name, position, date applied, date of any response. Clean, organized. The kind of system a person builds when they need to feel like they are running something, even when the thing they are running is the wreckage of their own situation. By the end of the first week, he had applied to 19 positions. By the end of the second, 31. The responses came in 3 varieties. The automated reply that said, "Thank you for your application. We will be in touch," which always meant they would not be. The silence, which was its own kind of answer. And once, a phone screen with a recruiter named Darcy, who had a cheerful voice, and asked him 4 questions before telling him that the role required someone with a different industry background, which he had mentioned in his cover letter, but apparently the cover letter was not always read before the phone screen, which was a detail about the hiring process that he decided not to think about too hard. He managed the days carefully. That was the only word for it. Carefully. Like a man crossing ice, testing each step before committing weight. Mornings were Priya. He woke before her, made her breakfast, packed her lunch, walked her to the bus stop 2 blocks down, and stood on the corner until the bus turned the corner and swallowed her up. She always waved from the window. He always waved back. This was not a thing they had discussed or decided. It had simply started happening and become true. After the bus, he came back and opened the laptop and worked. He applied for jobs. He updated his resume for the 3rd time. Then the 4th. He rewrote his cover letter so many times that he eventually had 4 different versions saved in a folder labeled simply Letters. He reached out to former colleagues over email, careful and polite, the kind of emails that ask for nothing directly, but make clear that if something came up, he would be grateful to be considered. Most of them replied warmly. None of them had anything concrete to offer. His former coworker, a man named Pete, who wore the same brown jacket to the office every single day for the entire 6 years Marcus had worked there, sent him a text in the 2nd week that said, "Hang in there, buddy. Something will come through." Pete was a decent person, and he meant it genuinely, and it was the kind of message that is entirely correct and entirely useless at the same time. Marcus replied, "Thanks, man. Appreciate it." He did appreciate it. He also put the phone face down on the desk and stared at the job listing currently open on his screen. The evenings were Priya again. Homework, dinner, bath, book, bed. He had gotten efficient at meals in a way he had not been before. Rice was a staple. Eggs appeared in more forms than he previously thought possible. He learned that a can of beans combined with the right seasoning could become something that a 7-year-old would eat without complaint, which he considered a genuine culinary achievement. He made a game of it in his head. How many meals could he build from what he had, without making Priya feel like anything had changed? She did not seem to notice anything had changed. Or she noticed and decided not to say so, which was its own small form of grace that he was not sure a 7-year-old should already have, but she appeared to. His neighbor left food outside his door for the first time on a Thursday in the 2nd week. He almost tripped over it on his way to check the mail. A green Tupperware container, sealed tight, still warm. He looked down the hall. He looked at the container. He picked it up and brought it inside and opened it to find chicken stew with potatoes, and something that smelled like thyme. He stood in his kitchen holding the lid, and did not say anything, because there was no one to say it to. The neighbor's name was Carol. He knew her the way you know a neighbor in an apartment building, which is to say, he knew her name. He knew she lived 2 doors down. He knew she had a small dog named Biscuit who wore a plaid sweater in cold weather. And he knew she moved through the hallway with the unhurried ease of someone who had long ago made peace with most things. He had held the elevator for her maybe a dozen times. They had talked about the weather and about how the landlord still had not fixed the lobby light that had been flickering since October. He had never told her he was a single father. He had never told her he had lost his job. He had no idea how she knew, or if she knew, or if the food was just something she did, a reflex of generosity, aimed at no one in particular. He ate it that night after Priya was asleep. It was the best thing he had tasted in 2 weeks, not because it was extraordinary, but because someone had made it, and left it without asking for anything in return, not even acknowledgement, and that specific quality of kindness sat somewhere in his chest and did not leave quickly. He washed the container and left it outside her door the next morning, clean and dry. She did not mention it. He did not mention it. 2 days later there was another one. This became the rhythm of it. His brother called on a Friday evening at the end of the 2nd week. His brother's name was Calvin, and he was 3 years older, and had the particular confidence of a man who had always taken the practical road, and was not entirely wrong to have done so, but was also not entirely easy to talk to because of it. Calvin worked in finance. Calvin had a house with a garage. Calvin had a wife named Donna, and 2 kids, and a system for everything, including, apparently, for this phone call. He said he had heard through their mother that Marcus was between jobs. He said he wanted to help. He said it in the way of a man who has rehearsed saying it and knows he is being generous, but cannot completely remove from his voice the fact that he is also, on some small level, not entirely surprised. Marcus thanked him. He said he had things under control. Calvin said, "Are you sure?" Because I can send something, it is not a big deal. Marcus said he was sure. There was a pause in which both of them could feel the shape of a much older conversation they were not having. The one that went back decades to a childhood, and a father who left, and two boys who dealt with it by becoming very different kinds of men. Calvin said, "Call me if that changes." Marcus said, "I will." He would not. He hung up and went to check on Priya, who was asleep with one arm hanging off the bed, and her mouth slightly open, and he stood in the doorway for a moment, and felt the weight of loving someone that completely, the way it holds you to the ground even when the ground is moving. He went back to the desk. He opened the notebook. 35 applications. He wrote the number and looked at it. Then he turned the page and started a new entry. The library on Henley Street posted a flyer in their community board section that he almost scrolled past. Small business networking event. Free admission. Guest speakers. Light refreshments. It was the kind of event he would have considered beneath his attention 18 months ago, back when he had a job and an office and a 10 o'clock meeting to prepare for. Now he read every word of the flyer twice. He added it to the calendar for the following Thursday. He was not sure what he expected from it. He was not a man who believed in magic or fate or the idea that good things arrive on schedule if you simply stay patient. He believed in showing up and doing the work and not collapsing in front of your daughter. Those were his 3 operating principles, and they had gotten him this far. He showed up to the networking event 10 minutes early and stood near the coffee table with a cup of coffee he was not drinking, listening to the ambient noise of people who knew each other well enough to stand in groups and laugh at things. He did not know anyone well enough to do that. He was about to check his phone for the time when a woman crossed the room toward him with the specific kind of walk that belongs to people who have already decided what they are going to do before they do it. He recognized her hands before he recognized her face. She was the woman from the grocery store. She walked toward him without hesitation, the way people walk when they are not approaching a stranger, but someone they have already decided to speak to. She was in her mid-60s, silver-haired, dressed simply in dark slacks and a plain blouse, and she had the kind of posture that comes from decades of standing in rooms and expecting to be taken seriously. She stopped in front of him and said, "You are the man from the grocery store on Greenfield." It was not a question. Marcus looked at her. He remembered the register. He remembered her hands. He said yes. She said, "I thought so. I never forget a face." She extended her hand. "My name is Dolores Grant." He shook it and told her his name. She nodded as though she were filing it somewhere. She said, "What you did was kind. I want you to know I noticed." He said it was nothing. He said it the way people say it when they mean it. Not to be polite, but because in the moment, it truly had not felt like a calculation. She looked at him in a way that suggested she knew the difference. She asked what brought him to the networking event. He told her he was between positions, looking for opportunities, exploring options, the careful language a person assembles when they do not want to sound desperate, even when they are in fact quite desperate. She asked what kind of work he did. He told her, operations management, logistics, team coordination, 6 years at a mid-sized distribution firm before the restructuring. He said restructuring, without any particular bitterness, and she noticed that too, because her eyes stayed level, and she did not offer any of the sympathetic noises people usually make. She said, "How were you let go? What was the actual reason?" It was a direct question. He had not expected it. He took a breath and told her the truth, not the softened version. The department head who had come in 18 months ago had a vision that did not include Marcus, and rather than manage the tension, the company had taken the easier exit. He had not done anything wrong. He had simply not been useful to someone who was now in charge. She nodded once, not sympathetically, analytically. She said her name was Dolores Grant, and she owned a property management company called Grant Property Services. She had started it 15 years ago from a small office with 2 employees, and now had 12, and managed over 200 residential units across the city. She said she had been trying to hire an operations manager for 4 months. Marcus said nothing. He waited. She said 3 candidates had come through. None of them had been right. She did not elaborate on what right meant, but she said the word with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for and had simply not found it yet. She reached into her bag and produced a business card. It was plain, white, no design flourish. Just her name and number, and the company name. She held it out. She said, "Come and see the office on Thursday, 10 in the morning. No promises, I just want to have a proper conversation." He took the card. He said he would be there. She nodded, and then, without any ceremony, turned and walked toward a group of people across the room who clearly knew her well and were visibly pleased she had arrived. She did not look back. Marcus stood by the coffee table holding a business card and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He looked at the card for a moment. Then he put it in his shirt pocket, very carefully, as though it were made of something that could be damaged by careless handling. He drove home. Priya was at Carol's. It was one of the Tuesday and Thursday arrangements they had quietly fallen into since Marcus had started the job search. Carol offering without being asked, and Marcus accepting without making a production of his gratitude, because Carol was the kind of woman who found elaborate gratitude uncomfortable. He picked Priya up at 7. She had eaten dinner with Carol and biscuit and was in the comfortable, slightly drowsy state of a child who has been fed and entertained by someone who genuinely enjoyed the company of children. She told Marcus about a documentary Carol had shown her about penguins, which led to a 20-minute conversation in the car, and through the entire bedtime routine, about whether penguins were, in her words, actually the nicest birds. He said he thought they probably were. He tucked her in. He did the voices. He came back to his desk. He put the business card in the center of his desk and looked at it. His phone rang. It was Calvin. He let it go to voicemail. Calvin left a message that Marcus listened to later. "Just checking in. Let me know if you change your mind about the offer. Donna says hi. The kids are good." He sat for a while. He called Pete. Pete answered on the second ring, with the same energy he brought to everything, which was moderate enthusiasm and complete reliability. Marcus told him about the networking event. He told him about the property management company. He told him about the business card sitting on his desk. Pete said, "A property management job from a woman at a library?" Marcus said yes. Pete was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "I mean, it is probably worth a conversation, right?" It was not the response Marcus had been hoping for. He was not entirely sure what response he had been hoping for. He thanked Pete and said he would keep him updated and hung up. He opened his laptop. He looked up Grant Property Services. The website was clean and functional, no wasted space. 15 years in business. A small team, names and faces listed on an about page. Dolores's photo matched the woman he had met. Same posture, same direct expression, slightly shorter hair in the photo. The company managed residential properties across several neighborhoods he knew well. The reviews were good, consistently good, not inflated. Residents praised responsiveness and care. A few mentioned Dolores by name. One wrote, "This company actually treats you like a person," which sounds like a low bar but apparently is not. He read until past midnight. He thought about what it would mean to walk into that office Thursday and be genuinely useful to something again. Not to have a job exactly, but to have a place where the things he was good at actually mattered. He had been good at his previous job. Not perfect, but genuinely skilled. He knew how to see the shape of a process and find where it was leaking. He knew how to talk to people in a way that made them feel heard rather than managed. He knew how to hold 12 things in his head simultaneously, without dropping any of them, which was not a universal talent, and which he had spent 6 years quietly proving, before a restructuring made it irrelevant. He wanted to do that again. He wanted to walk into that office on Thursday and show Dolores Grant exactly what right looked like. He closed the laptop at 12:47 in the morning and went to bed. He did not stare at the ceiling. For the first time in 5 weeks, he fell asleep before he had time to finish the math. Thursday morning arrived like most important mornings do, quietly, giving no outward sign that it is different from any other. The light through the curtains was the same thin gray it always was at that hour. The refrigerator hummed. Down the hall, Priya was still asleep, one arm hanging off the bed in the exact position it had been in every morning for as long as he could remember, as though even in sleep she was reaching for something. Marcus was already dressed. He had been awake since 5:30, which was 40 minutes before his alarm. He did not go back to sleep when he woke, because there was no realistic path from that level of alertness back to unconsciousness. He lay still for a few minutes, and then got up and made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table in the quiet, and went through the things he wanted to say. Not a script. He did not believe in scripts for conversations that actually mattered, but a structure, the bones of how he wanted to present himself, the things he wanted to make clear, the questions he wanted to ask. He had learned long ago that the people who impressed in important conversations were rarely the ones who said the most. They were the ones who asked the questions that made the other person feel genuinely considered. He wrote a few of those questions in the notebook. Then he closed it. Carol agreed to take Priya to school. She appeared at the door at 7:15 with Biscuit on a leash and told Marcus to go and not worry. He thanked her. She waved this off the way she waved off most expressions of gratitude, as though they were pleasant but not strictly necessary. He drove to the office on Henderson Road. Grant Property Services occupied a modest space on the second floor of a two-story building that was old enough to have character, but well-maintained enough to suggest that the people inside it took care of things. There was a small reception area with a real plant on the desk, which told him something. Plants that are genuinely alive in an office reception are a detail. Either someone remembers to water them or someone has made sure that they do not need much water, and either way it means someone is paying attention. The receptionist, a young woman whose nameplate said Brit, looked up when he came in and said she would let Dolores know he was here. Her expression was professional, but he caught, just briefly, the look of a person who has seen too many wrong candidates come through and is hoping this one is different. He sat. He looked at the office. He could see through a glass partition into the main work area. 4 desks. A large whiteboard on the far wall covered in color-coded categories that he could read from where he was sitting. Property codes on the left, maintenance statuses across the middle, tenant communications on the right. It was a system, a workable one. He could see immediately where it was holding and where it was straining. The maintenance column had too many items sitting in a category marked pending for longer than made operational sense. He did not say this. He made a note of it internally and filed it away. Dolores came out from a back office. Same posture, same directness. She shook his hand and led him inside. The conversation lasted just over an hour. She asked him about his previous work, not the resume version, but the real version. She wanted to know about specific problems he had solved and how, about moments where things had gone wrong, and what he had done. She asked about a time he had disagreed with a decision his employer made, and how he had handled it. He told the truth on all of it, including the parts that did not make him look flawless, because he had realized by the second week of the job search that the interviews where he tried to present a perfect version of himself went nowhere, while the conversations where he was simply accurate about who he was tended to go somewhere. She listened in a way that was unusual, not nodding along or making encouraging noises, just listening, with her hands flat on the desk and her attention entirely on him. He asked his questions. He asked about the team structure and what the current gap looked like from her perspective. He asked about the maintenance column on the whiteboard, mentioned it carefully, said he had noticed the pending category, and was curious how long items typically sat there. She stopped and looked at him differently for a moment, the way a person looks when they realize something is more interesting than they initially thought. She told him about the pending backlog. He asked 2 more questions. She answered them, and then she leaned back slightly and said, "I want you to meet Gene." Gene was her business partner. He came in from a back room and sat across from Marcus and asked exactly 2 questions in the next 35 minutes, both of them so specific and so well-aimed that Marcus understood immediately that Gene was not a man who used words for decoration. He answered both questions fully, without rushing, and when he finished, Gene looked at Dolores in a way that communicated something Marcus could not quite read but which felt significant. Gene said he had another call and excused himself. He shook Marcus's hand on the way out. Dolores walked Marcus out through the reception area. At the door she said, "I want to do a second meeting. I want you to come back Tuesday, same time. Can you do that?" He said yes. She said, "Good." He walked to his car. He sat in the driver's seat and looked at the steering wheel for a moment. He texted Pete, "Second meeting Tuesday." Pete replied with a thumbs up, which was the digital equivalent of "hang in there, buddy. Something will come through." And Marcus put his phone face down and looked out the window at the ordinary street and the ordinary sky above it. He let himself sit with it for exactly 2 minutes. Then he drove to pick up Priya early from school, because it was a good day, and she deserved an early pickup on a good day, and that was the only logic he needed. She came running out of the building with her backpack swinging, and her hair coming loose from its braid and her face bright with the particular joy of unexpected good news, which in this case was simply that her father was there an hour early, and that was enough to be wonderful. She said, "How was your day?" He said, "Pretty good, Bug." She reached for his hand. They walked to the car. He made dinner that night with what he had, which was not much but was enough, and Priya sat at the table and narrated her math homework again, louder than necessary, the way she always did when she was happy, and the kitchen was full of the sound of her voice, and the smell of food, and the particular warm weight of an ordinary evening that feels, from the inside, like something more than ordinary. He put her to bed. He did the voices. He came back and sat at his desk. He wrote in the notebook, "Second meeting, Tuesday." He looked at Priya's drawing still taped to the wall above him, the man in the tie, the big building with the many windows, the purple letters. He did not tape anything new next to it yet. He turned off the lamp and went to bed. He thought about Tuesday. He did not stare at the ceiling. Tuesday morning was cooler than the weeks before it, the first real suggestion that the season was preparing to change. Marcus drove to Henderson Road with the window down a few inches, enough to let the air move through the car without being uncomfortable. He had slept well. He had not expected to, but he had. He was wearing the same jacket he had worn to the first meeting, the dark one he kept for situations that required him to look like he had things organized, which he did, even when the evidence of his life was suggesting otherwise. He had polished his shoes the night before after Priya was asleep, which was a habit his grandfather had passed to him, with the general message that you should always look like you respect the room you are walking into. Britt looked up when he came in. This time her expression was different, still professional, but the guarded look was gone. She smiled and said Dolores was expecting him. He sat. Dolores came out 2 minutes later with a man he had not met at the first meeting. She introduced him as Alan, her accountant, who would be sitting in briefly. Alan was in his 50s and had the precise, contained energy of a man who processes information quickly and makes no unnecessary movements. He shook Marcus's hand, sat down, and opened a slim folder. The second meeting was shorter than the first, more focused. Dolores had clearly already processed the first conversation and moved past it. The questions this time were about specific logistics, about how Marcus would approach the pending maintenance backlog, about how he would build working relationships with the contractors they used, about his approach to tenant communications in difficult situations. He answered each one clearly and without padding. When he did not know something, he said so and described how he would find out. Alan asked one question. It was about budget management. Marcus answered it. Alan wrote something in his folder. Toward the end, Dolores excused Alan, who said a quiet goodbye and left with his folder and his contained energy. Dolores and Marcus sat across from each other. She said, "I have one more question." He waited. She said, "Why did you give that woman her grocery money at the store that day? You did not know her. You do not look like a man who is doing so well that $12 is nothing." He thought about it. He said, "I saw her hands. She was embarrassed. I know what that feels like, and I did not want her to have to feel it longer than necessary." Dolores looked at him for a moment. Then she opened the desk drawer. She took out a single key on a plain silver ring. She set it on the desk between them. She said, "That is the office key. The position is yours if you want it. You would start next Monday. We can go over the full terms before you leave today." Marcus looked at the key. It was not a dramatic object. It was a small, ordinary piece of metal on a ring, the kind of thing a person could lose in a coat pocket without noticing. It looked like exactly what it was. He did not pick it up immediately. He sat with it for a moment, because the thing that nobody tells you about a door finally opening is that you need a few seconds to remember how to walk through one. Not from fear, from the particular weight of having held everything alone for long enough that receiving something real takes a breath to absorb. He picked up the key. It was light. He said, "Thank you." She said, "You can thank me after the first 3 months when I know for certain I made the right call. but she said it with something in her voice that was not quite warmth exactly, but something close to it, the voice of a person who has already made up their mind and is only half pretending otherwise. He shook her hand. They spent the next 40 minutes going through the terms. The salary was fair, genuinely fair, the kind of number that would cover the rent and the oil change and the electricity auto pay and, he calculated in the back of his mind while nodding at the appropriate moments, $4.29 cereal boxes with birds named Freddie on them. He left the office at just past noon. He walked to his car and unlocked it and sat in the driver's seat. He held the office key in his hand. He thought about the box he had carried out of his previous job, the one that was not heavy, Gerald the cactus, and the cracked notebook, and a photo of Priya, and the sense of a floor dropping out beneath him. He thought about the grocery store and the $20 and the woman's hands. He thought about 35 job applications in a notebook with a cracked spine. He thought about eggs in every form a person can cook them, and Carol's Tupperware and Priya's drawing of the man in the tie, and the purple letters, and the bus that swallowed her up every morning at the corner 2 blocks down, while he waved from the sidewalk. He did not call anyone from the parking lot. Not Pete, not Calvin, not anyone. He sat with it himself, just for a few minutes, because some things belong to you, before they belong to anyone else. Then he drove to Priya's school. He sat in the pickup line for 22 minutes. The line moved in the slow, inching way school pickup lines always move, and he watched the other cars and the other parents and the ordinary machinery of a weekday afternoon. He thought about nothing important. He let his mind rest. The doors of the school opened and children began to come out in the chaotic, energetic wave that happens at 3 o'clock every afternoon, everywhere in the world. And then he saw her, backpack swinging, hair coming loose again, moving through the crowd with the focused direction of a child who has already spotted the car. She climbed in. She said, "How was your day?" He said, "Pretty good, Bug." She buckled her seatbelt and looked at him with the assessment of a person who has known you long enough to notice things. She said, "You look happy." He said, "I am." She seemed to find this satisfactory. She turned to look out the window as he pulled out of the lot. After a moment, she said, "Can we have cereal for dinner? The one with Freddie?" He said yes. She smiled and went back to looking out the window at the passing street and the sky that was beginning to turn the particular orange of late afternoon and early autumn. And the car moved forward through the ordinary world with its ordinary light. And in his hand, in his jacket pocket, was a small silver key on a plain ring, and it was lighter than everything he had been carrying for the past 5 weeks, and heavier, in the best way, than anything he had held in a very long time. He drove home. He bought the cereal. Freddie had a good day that day. So did Marcus Cole.